We know Fran Brown can recruit, but the question is, can he be a head coach?
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, the three biggest storylines for Syracuse football next season. We're going to start off with, we know Fran Brown can recruit, but can he be a successful head coach on the field? Then we're going to talk about Kyle McCord and whether or not he's going to have a successful season, and then answer some of the defensive line questions for the upcoming year. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, like I said already twice, Fran Brown can recruit. The data supports that. He comes over from Georgia as the number one recruiter in the nation, according to 24/7 Sports, which is obviously great because Syracuse football has struggled to really recruit well over the years. And Fran Brown, with his recruiting pedigree, he comes to Syracuse and he takes the hill by storm. He takes the hill by storm, right? Just based on 24/7 Sports here, Syracuse has the 36th overall recruiting class in the country for this upcoming season. And on face value, you might not know how significant that is. Is 36 good? Is it bad? Well, if it's Alabama, it's bad. But for Syracuse, that's the best recruiting class since 2001. Let that sink in. The best recruiting class Syracuse football has had since 2001. That's 23 years. And Fran Brown hasn't coached a game yet. So we know he can recruit out of high school. We also know he can recruit out of college. Syracuse has a top 25 transfer class in the country. Of course, that's headlined by Kyle McCord, which we're going to talk about later in the show, and Fadil Diggs on that defensive line. We're also going to talk about him. Kind of ironic that those are the two big transfers, and we're talking about them on today's podcast. So with all that being said, we understand Fran Brown has accomplished a lot already. He can really recruit. He can get some talent on this team. The question is, can he be a head coach on the field? That's going to be one of the main stories for this upcoming season. And let's examine his background, right? He was the defensive backs coach at Georgia for the last two seasons. Obviously, it's a big program like Georgia, but he was the defensive backs coach. I'm not saying that's a bad role or anything, but there's a big difference between defensive backs coach and being a head coach. Okay? Before that, he's been around the block in college football. He's been at Baylor, at Temple, and at Rutgers as well. The highest rank he has ever had as a coach is co-defensive coordinator. That's the highest one. And that was at Temple. So that's the most he's ever been, as a co-defensive coordinator. So with all that being said, Fran Brown has never been a head coach at the Division I level. The highest he's ever been is a defensive coordinator, which is why one of the main stories for this upcoming season is, all right, Fran Brown, you've done a great job getting talent into this program. Kyle McCord is a really good player. Fadil Diggs, that's not your SEC transfer just looking for playing. No, that guy can play pretty much anywhere. Fadil Diggs is really, really talented, a top 60 overall transfer in the country, right? And you get the 36th overall recruiting class in the country. Maybe some of them are going to see the field, right? I'm projecting that Yassine Willis, the running back, is at least going to be the backup next season behind LaQuinn Allen. So he's got talent. Can he coach? That's going to be one of the main stories. And the good news is is Fran Brown, his staff, he has surrounded himself with people who have been in their positions before. It's not a situation where it's a first-year head coach with a first-time defensive coordinator and a first-time offensive coordinator. That maybe would make me a little bit more concerned. But Fran Brown's a first-time head coach. You have Jeff Nixon, who is experienced both in college and in the NFL as your offensive coordinator. He's done it, both levels. And Elijah Robinson was the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M. So you got, and by the way, Elijah Robinson was an interim head coach too. So you got coordinators who have been there and done that, and that's why I know I wasn't hosting the podcast at the time, but I really like the hires that Fran Brown was making around his staff because he's a first-time head coach. He needs people who know, well, quite frankly, what they're doing on offense and on defense. One thing that I'm very curious about with Fran Brown, and I talked about it with Neil Adler, and I've mentioned it before on the podcast, is can he improve the penalty situation? I'm just going through the last 5 years. So 2019 to 2023, where Syracuse ranked penalties across the nation. Okay, this is where I want to see Fran Brown improve this team the most. In 2019, second worst in the country. That's not good. Second worst is not good. You don't need me to tell you that. That ain't good. 2020. You remember that year. That's a year that we don't like to forget. But they were bottom 25 in the country in penalties per game. That's part of the reason why they only won one game that year, right? But they were terrible in 2020. 2021, bottom half of the country, which is, I guess, an improvement, but still you're in the bottom half. Can you be in the upper half, right? 2022, worst in the nation. The most penalized team in the nation in 2022 was Syracuse. Not good, right? And 2023, so this past year, bottom 15 in the country. Can Fran Brown, I know late game situations and everything like that, and we're not going to find out until we get to that situational football. Can Fran Brown improve the penalty situation on this team? And that's going to be one of the barometers when we're judging him as a head coach. Is this a team that's going to play disciplined football, or are they going to commit a lot of penalties like they have in the past? Even in 2018, because I did a quick scan, 2018, 2017, even in 2018, when they went 10-3, they committed a lot of penalties per game. Can Fran Brown clean that up? So we're going over, once again, the three biggest storylines for Syracuse football next season. And the first storyline, can Fran Brown legitimately be a head coach? He is a first-time head coach. He's only ever been a defensive coordinator as his highest rank. He comes over from Georgia as the number one recruiter in the country. He has fulfilled that end of the bargain so far. Now let's just see if he can translate the Jimmies and Joes to the X's and O's. So, can Fran Brown coach? Let's see. Let's find out. I'm hopeful. I believe in him. I want to make that clear, but that is one of the big storylines for this upcoming season, and we might find out very quickly. You got Ohio at home to start. Are you going to blow out Ohio like you should? You got Georgia Tech at home week 2. That's a game you could lose. Syracuse could lose week 2 to Georgia Tech. It could happen. Can you win that game? Can this team start 4-0? Once again, can they win 8 games? A lot of it's going to depend on whether or not Fran Brown is a solid head coach. Now, coming up, we're going to talk about Kyle McCord. It's one thing to watch baseball on TV. That at times can get pretty boring. But going to a game in person is an awesome experience, and I'm looking forward to watching the Mets for the rest of the summer. I'm actually going to the game tomorrow night against the Oakland Athletics. We're not going to be able to say Oakland Athletics for very long. The way I'll be watching the Mets in person and the way I purchase tickets for the game tomorrow is by using Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. All you have to do is go to Gametime and search the team you want to see of your choosing. It can be MLB or any league for that matter, and ticket options will appear right away. My favorite part is the all-in pricing feature. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On College Football Podcast. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion on the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new college football expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And let's now continue the discussion of the three biggest storylines for Syracuse football this upcoming season. We just went over Fran Brown and whether or not he's going to be a successful head coach. We know he can recruit, but can he coach? Now it's time to talk about Kyle McCord. Where do I start? How about we start at the very beginning with Kyle McCord? He's a 4-star transfer from Ohio State. He's a former 5-star high school recruit. And last season, on the surface, he looked pretty good. Almost 3,200 yards, 24 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions. So that's a touchdown-interception ratio of 4-1. That's really solid. We'll take that, obviously. And a completion rate of about 66%. Really good numbers across the board. And on top of that, top 10 QBR in the country last year. And he led Ohio State to an 11-1 record. And as a Syracuse podcast host, but also a Syracuse fan and a Syracuse alum, I would love if this team went 11-1 next season. I know Ohio State, 11-1 and not making the playoff is a failure for them. For us, I'll take 11-1. I'll be very, very happy. And McCord was a big reason why that they went 11-1. Or really was he? Was he a big reason? That's the kicker. That's the kicker right there with Kyle McCord because, well, we got to be honest. We got to be fair, right? He had the best receiver in the country on his team. Ever heard of Marvin Harrison Jr.? You obviously know Marvin Harrison Sr. He went to Syracuse. But Marvin Harrison Jr., the number 4 pick in the NFL draft to the Arizona Cardinals, he was the best receiver in the nation last year. Kyle McCord was throwing it to him. He also had another first-round receiver he was throwing to, or first-round caliber receiver. He just didn't declare for this year's draft, and that was Emeka Egbuka. So 2 first-round NFL talent players that he was throwing to. Not to mention that he had a terrific running game, the offensive line, and the fact that he's playing at Ohio State. They have talent across the board. They are absolutely loaded. Where McCord gets penalized by national experts, maybe not so from myself, but from others, is the fact that he didn't set the world on fire. That's when I give you his numbers, they look pretty good on the surface. But the guys before him that were starting at Ohio State, C.J. Stroud, Justin Fields, Dwayne Haskins, there's been some hits and misses at the NFL level for those 3, but they were all first-round NFL picks. All of them. All of them were in the Heisman conversation at some point at Ohio State. And by the way, I got to give credit to my dad for this one because he pointed out another quarterback at Ohio State that couldn't even see the field during that time. His name is Joe Burrow. That's right. Joe Burrow was at Ohio State, couldn't see the field, and transferred to LSU, and the rest is history. So really, it's like the last 4 Ohio State quarterbacks Kyle McCord has not shown that he is one of those four. And that is why he gets really penalized. That's why Ohio State essentially pushed him out the door. So the storyline with him is, was he a product of being at Ohio State, and that's why he had successful numbers, right? He's throwing to Marvin Harrison, Egbuka, and a great running game and all of that. Or is he actually a really solid quarterback, and we should be happy that we have him? I personally am leaning a lot more towards, I think he's a really good quarterback. I genuinely do. I think he's the best quarterback in a decade for this team. Easily. It's just, he doesn't have Marvin Harrison to throw to, and that's okay. Oronde Gadsden's really good. I like the weapons. But there's a compensation here. He's playing in an easier conference in the ACC than the Big Ten with an easier schedule. He doesn't have to play even the beasts of the ACC. There's no Florida State. There's no Clemson. There's not even a Notre Dame, which Syracuse will occasionally play. Overall, I think McCord's really solid. I think he's going to prove a lot of people wrong for this upcoming season, but it's one of the big stories. And I know it's cliche to say like the head coach is a big story and the quarterback is a big story, but you got a first-year head coach, so obviously that's a big one. And Kyle McCord is an Ohio State transfer who had success there and is now taking his talents to Syracuse. So it's very, very interesting. I'm curious to see what he's going to do. I think he's going to have a good year. If I had to project numbers-wise, I think it's going to be close to what he did last year at Ohio State because, yeah, he gets a tick up for being in an easier conference, but in an easier schedule. At the same time, he's not throwing to Marvin Harrison, and I know I get it. He's not throwing to Marvin Harrison on this team. So all that balances out to where I think he's going to have over 3,000 yards. Hopefully he has a touchdown interception ratio of 4-1, completion rate of mid-60s. I think we'll gladly take those numbers from him. And who knows? Maybe he can lead this team to more wins than I think, which is 8. Or more wins from what Fadil's saying, which is 7.5. Overall, I like McCord. I think he's a good quarterback. He's certainly one of the big stories for this upcoming season. Now, coming up, we're going to go over the defensive line. And we know Fadil Diggs is good, but who else is going to step up? So let's go over this defensive line for Syracuse football next season. And I know that I did a whole preview of it last week, but after thinking about it and doing this video and preparing for it and coming up with 3 main storylines, I thought that the defensive line deserved to be shouted out once again because I got some questions for it. I do. I'm a little bit skeptical about this defensive line for Syracuse football. All right. We know who the leader is. And if you don't know who the leader is, that's okay. I'm going to tell you right now. It's Fadil Diggs. He is a 4-star Texas A&M transfer. He was the number 56 overall player in the portal in the country. So top 60 transfer in the country. And he was the best player that Syracuse football brought in the transfer portal. He might be their best addition, period, if you want to include high school recruiting as well. Fadil Diggs is really, really, really good. All right. He had 11 tackles for loss last season at Texas A&M. Obviously, there's familiarity with Elijah Robinson, the defensive coordinator for the Orange, because, well, those two were together at Texas A&M. And those 11 tackles for loss, by the way, were second on the Aggies. This is a legitimate player. And one that when Syracuse football got, I was like, whoa, like they got him? That's a real player right there from the SEC. That's a real dude. He can play. He's good. And he is criminally underrated on pretty much any site you pick. I mean, you can even go look at the video game. He's like an 81 overall when you got other guys like Justin Barrett and Marlo Wax, and I'm not saying they're bad or anything like that, but they're like in the 88 overall and 89 overall, and Fadil Diggs is at like 81 overall. And I'm like, there's not a 7 overall difference, because I think that Fadil Diggs is the second best player on the Cuse behind Oronde Gadsden. I think he is the second best player. But outside of Fadil Diggs, who is going to step up on this defensive line? That is one of the main stories for this team this upcoming season. Who's it going to be? It's pretty much anyone's guess right now who it's going to be. And it's important to note that one of those players, unfortunately, will not be Braylon Ingram. Braylon Ingram, he tore his Achilles, so he is out for the season, and he's actually done for his career. And it's such a sucky situation. I really feel for him. So he's not going to have that opportunity to slide into maybe the starting lineup for this team this upcoming season, but more so like his football career is over, and that's terrible. So I really feel for him, and he's not going to be able to contribute on the field for this upcoming season for this team. So now you don't have Braylon Ingram, so that's a hit to the depth for the Orange next season on the defensive line. Who's going to step up? Right? There's Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff we went over. There's Dennis Jaquez. There's Kevin Jobity. Which one of those three is going to break out for this upcoming season? Who's it going to be? Who will step up for this defensive line? And the reason why I mentioned those three names, first of all, they're all holdovers. These are players that have been with the program for years. They've been with the program. They have combined for 6 total starts. That's it. Those 3 players, Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff, Dennis Jaquez, and Kevin Jobity, have combined for 6 total starts in their collegiate careers at Syracuse. So it's going to be a story. Who is going to take the job? Who is going to earn the starting spot along the defensive line? Is it going to be one of those 3? Is it going to be 2? Is it going to be all 3 of them? Because we know Fadil Diggs. We know Fadil Diggs has a spot. He's great. But who else will be beside him? I don't know. Then there's Dion Wilson. Dion Wilson is a New Mexico State transfer. He had a solid success last season, but that was at New Mexico State. There's a big difference between New Mexico State and Syracuse. Syracuse is in a Power 4 conference. I know we don't have the toughest schedule in the ACC. In fact, we have the easiest schedule in the country. It's still tougher than New Mexico State. Will Dion Wilson be a starting defensive lineman for this team? And there's other players, too, along that defensive line. But when I look at that unit, that is honestly the unit that I'm most concerned about. Because, all right, offensive line, well, that could be mitigated if Kyle McCord can get rid of the ball quickly, right? If you get rid of the ball quickly, that helps your offensive line tremendously. It's when you hold on to the ball for too long, then your offensive line will start to break down if it's really not that good. And I know when I had Neil Adler on the podcast, we talked about the special teams. And honestly, I think they have pretty good special teams with Trevor Pena back there and Malachi James, potentially the true freshman, and Jack Stonehouse is a solid punter. So can Denneberg be better than he was last year as the kicker? I like their special teams. It's the defensive line. Fadil Diggs leads the way, and there's question marks across it. So one of the main stories is, well, can they step up? Can someone or can multiple players along the front break out? Because if one of them does or multiple of them do, it's going to be a good unit. I'm not saying it's going to be a bad unit. It's just the one that I am most concerned about for this upcoming season. I'm really not, and when we're looking at the 3 storylines, I'm really not concerned about Fran Brown. I genuinely think he's going to be a good head coach. I do. I think he's going to be good. He's already been He's already left his imprint on this program, all right? He is a CEO-type head coach. He's going to be good. Kyle McCord, I think with his pedigree, he's going to do just fine. I'm not worried about Kyle McCord. Defensive line, that's the one of the three stories that I mentioned where I'm like, I don't know. I hope it's good next season. I know Fadil Diggs is really good, but who is going to step up is the main question for this team over there. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On College Football Podcast, from NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football, so you don't need to search. It's in the description below. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. So coming up on the podcast, we got on Wednesday, on Wednesday, the players most likely on this team to be all conference selections. So we're essentially going over the best players on the team and their likelihood of making all ACC. And then on Thursday, well, we're going to talk about who's going to break out. Who are some sleepers? Who are some breakout candidates for Syracuse football this upcoming season? And if you have any thoughts, any suggestions, leave a comment in the comment section below. Who you think is going to break out for this team? Who do you think is going to make all ACC for this team? Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you know right away when I'm dropping the next podcast. And everyone, take care.